Welcome to TYT Sports and RotoWire. Chris Liss from RotoWire.com, Ben Mankiewicz, Jason Rubin here. So fantasy football around the corner. Drafts are gearing up, hence why we have Chris Liss on here again to break down some great fantasy news for you. So to start, I want to get right into this. Fantasy's number one pick this year, I feel, is different from previous years, where not necessarily last year, but for a long time, Adrian Peterson was the number one pick. Consensus, or you're a moron. And now we move into this season, there might not be a clear number one pick. Chris, I want to start with you. Do you have a clear, concise number one pick for fantasy football?
It's not obvious, and it's not by like a huge margin, right? I think that if I were to pick number one, I would take Le'Veon Bell, even with the suspension, because if you look at how many catches and receiving yards he gets, and then add in the fact that you're not going to get a zero those 2 games that you're not using him. You're going to get someone. Rashad Jennings is going to be your starter for 2 weeks. Okay, you can live with that. Then you get 14 games of Le'Veon Bell. That's my top pick. But I will say that Adrian Peterson is a very legitimate other choice there. PPR, I think it's Le'Veon Bell, no-brainer. Okay. Although you could look at Antonio Brown in that case, but I'd probably still go Bell. But I think it's close, and I think there's a lot of disagreement about this, and you could get your first choice with the 5th or 6th overall pick this year.
Right. I think that the great thing about picking Le'Veon Bell number one, which is what I would do too, is that it's a confident pick because you're saying, I know I can go 1-1. Like, I know it. I know it. I know that I can pull this off. So, and then you think, okay, great. I'm 1-1, and now I'm adding Le'Veon Bell. Now I'm ready to start the season. If you take him one and you lose your first 2 games, and it's because you don't get much production from running back, then you're gonna feel it. Obviously, anybody can recover from 0-2, but I like the confidence of saying I'm good enough to mix and manage a roster where I'm going to win one of my first 2 games. The unknown with Peterson is that, like, obviously you can make both arguments. You can say, hey, look, this is a guy who did not suffer any kind of injury and was not touched last year, and therefore could well be a little bit better. This is an interesting thing for a running back of his age to not take that year of punishment when it wasn't because he hurt his knee. The flip side is this is a guy now who's been away from football for some time, and he is of an age when maybe, you lose 5%, 7% of your explosiveness. You go from being an elite running back to an average running back very quickly in this league.
Well, let me just say one thing. You've got to read the article. It's by Eli Saslow in the Washington Post. I think he did it for ESPN about Peterson and how much of a psycho he is in the offseason.
Oh, right. Yes, right.
Did you read that article?
I did, yeah.
After reading that, I was like, I'm drafting this guy. I've got to rethink the Le'Veon Bell number one. This guy is like such a fanatic. He lives in his own world. He worked out like such a maniac. I think that Peterson that year after going to do him good. It's going to be like Alex Rodriguez, and he's going to just have a monster year. But he's still never going to be the receiver that Le'Veon Bell is, and so I have Bell narrowly ahead of him.
Right. So we have how many of the rankings have pulled down, but thanks to Chris, we have RotoWire.com's top 12 rankings, and these always can be tweaked. So let's first take a look at that graphic, but I just want to preempt that with, and I'm sure Chris can go into more detail, it really depends on your league, and you can customize your rankings with that.
Well, and you could very quickly, let me just add, if you see the first receiver showing up at 10, 11, 12, you know that this is not a PPR league.
This must be a non-PPR 2-receiver league, which I don't really play in those. So, yeah, I wouldn't use those overalls, but within the positions, they're correct. This is a very unique league. But typically, in the leagues that I play, which are 3 receivers and a flex, and it's PPR, it's basically that ends up being 2 running backs, 4 receivers.
So you play 3 receivers and a flex.
3 receivers and a flex, not what this board reflects.
I usually play 2 receivers and a flex, but that's it.
So 3 and a flex PPR, you're basically starting 2 running backs, 4 receivers. It's basically a 4-receiver league, and receivers get shot up the board. So even though you might take Peterson and Bell 1 and 2, your next 5 picks might be receivers. In fact, they should be probably Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, Julio Jones, Demaryius Thomas, and Dez Bryant.
Go back to that list for a sec, because even in a league like that, I mean, there's like one of your lists, looking at a 2-receiver and a flex league. Right. RotoWire has Jamal Charles stuck in between Bell and Peterson.
Not on this list, but yeah, in a PPR league, Jamal Charles kind of excels because they're going to dump a lot of passes to him. And Peterson's just never been a good receiver. Now, some people say, well, Norv Turner's there. It's going to change.
So if you're in a PPR league, you move, then you can make it. You may not do it yourself, but you can make an argument that Charles belongs up there with Bell and Peterson.
Yes, I think in a PPR league, there's more of a big 4, right, which includes Lacy also.
Includes Lacy, who
okay,
also
and I think Lynch is a little bit lower in a PPR because, again, he catches passes, but he catches 35. He doesn't catch 55.
Right.
And that really makes a big difference.
And even the thing with Eddie Lacy, too, is you look at the quarterback in the Green Bay Packers offense. They have the best offense of those 4.
So look, I'm looking at a list here basically that is essentially my league, which is but that list too. Put that list up again, because in all of these lists that I've seen, almost every, no matter how you generate a RotoWire list, what I think is incredibly significant is that Andrew Luck is ahead of Aaron Rodgers every step of the way.
Yeah, and that's the consensus, although not that's sort of the consensus, meaning it's the majority, but not everybody thinks that. Some people prefer Rodgers. On a per-play basis, Rodgers is better. The reason I project Luck better than Rodgers is, A, he's at his peak of peaks. I mean, this is like his 4th year. This is when he's going to be at his best and healthiest and youngest still. Rodgers is still great, but Rodgers probably doesn't run quite as much as he does, in the past. He's been hurt in the last couple of years a little bit. Luck just looks like a monster. He gets tackled, he gets right back up. You've never even had a hint of him being on the injury report. And I think you're a better chance for 3-4 touchdowns instead of 1 or 2 for Rodgers, maybe another 50 yards rushing. And then, he may not be as efficient, but he's going to make up for it in volume.
Right. So as we move out of that first round, those first 12 picks, it gets more important as you go farther down the draft. If you're in a league like Chris's, you have 4 receivers, that's going to make the sleeper receivers and the sleeper running backs even more valuable. Who do you guys like? Chris, we'll start with you again. Who do you guys like at the bottom of the draft board that could make a big appearance this year, and rookies included? Yeah,
well, I mean, you want to get guys who can blow up, right? You don't really care if a guy's, you don't need Dwayne Bowe. I mean, I did in a 16-team league where I needed someone to start. But in most leagues in 12-team league, you don't need Dwayne Bowe, right? You need Devontae Parker. Mm-hmm. Maybe he's healthy week 1, week 2. A size, speed guy who Miami drafted in the first half of the first round. They expect him to do something, obviously, this year. You look at guys like Cody Latimer in Denver. He's the number 3 probably. He had trouble learning the playbook last year. He's big and he's fast. And if one of those Denver receivers were to get hurt, which is obviously happens all the time in football, he might be one of Peyton Manning's top 2 targets. So that's a guy I would look at. Devontae Adams, same thing in Green Bay. You want to look at guys with upside like that. Brashad Perriman could be the number 1 receiver, although he's got a knee problem and it's been lingering a little bit longer than we thought it might. So there are, when you want to look aggressively, I want guys who can make plays down the field. I want guys usually with size who can get red zone looks. In a PPR, you can look at possession guys, but mostly I want guys who are big and at least decently fast.
Let me ask you about a guy, Chris, who I'm going to make a mistake on again.
Okay.
And it's a guy I know you liked last year, and he really disappointed, but you can, if you feel like valuing this guy, you will chalk up his disappointment last year to the team's quarterback situation. You and I were both pretty high on Michael Floyd.
Right.
And then he really, really disappointed. Thoughts on him this year?
He's a tough one for a couple of reasons. One is he broke his fingers a couple weeks ago, so that's he's iffy for week 1. But he should be back. It's not like a half-season injury. It's like maybe a week or 2, if that. He may be back. 2, John Brown is a guy they really like who's going to develop in the second year, and they still have Larry Fitzgerald's carcass around who's going to absorb 115 targets, right? So how many times are they going to throw the ball? I mean, there's 3 guys now, 3 mouths to feed. Now, they don't have a tight end. They don't really have a 4th receiver they use much, so maybe the 3 of them can all do well. But I like Michael Floyd. I like the talent. I mean, he's 6'3", 225. He's fast. I mean, there's maybe, Julio Jones and Calvin Johnson, the only better physical specimens in the league than Michael Floyd. But they did, even before the quarterback disasters and the injuries, they started going away from Floyd at some point last year for I don't know what reason.
I don't know either.
And maybe there's something going on with him behind the scenes that we don't know, but I still like him as a bounce-back guy, but I think you can get him in the 7th or 8th round, and I like him there.
Let me jump back up the list a little bit and ask you just about one guy who I think, other than Antonio Brown, assuming it's a PPR league, who seems to be definitively the number 1 receiver, but a guy who I would take ahead of Dez Bryant, ahead of Demaryius Thomas, and ahead of Odell Beckham. I would take Julio Jones in a heartbeat as my number 2 receiver. As the number 2 receiver.
I wouldn't argue with you.
Yeah.
I don't see why I don't see why you feel strongly about that, but I wouldn't say that you're wrong.
I feel strongly about it because he hasn't been injury prone. He got hurt once, right? His quarterback hasn't gotten hurt.
Right.
And he is so definitively the best receiver on that team. And I don't feel like there is any danger whatsoever with him. I mean, I am afraid of Demaryius Thomas because I'm afraid of Peyton Manning.
Right.
And Odell Beckham I'm not afraid of, but I figure there's no way, all value is lost on Odell Beckham. In whatever league you're in, he's going to go too high.
Right.
Because either a Giant fan or just somebody too upset. His name, they love his name too much.
Let me just say one thing about Beckham, though, that you may or may not be aware of. Okay, so he missed 4 games outright with the hamstring injury, and then he came back for 2 games of which he didn't really get a full complement of snaps because he was getting up to speed in the offense. So he essentially had 10 full games where he had all the full snaps of a starting receiver. And over those 10 games, his stats, if you prorated him over 16, it's not 2 games prorated over 16. This is 10, right? It is 139 catches for 1,970-something yards and 18 touchdowns.
No, it's
breaking the all-time record for receiving, second highest receptions ever, and the fourth tied for the fourth highest touchdowns. Peak Jerry Rice wishes he had a season as good as Odell Beckham's prorated 10-game stint. Now, you're right. It's going to regress. There's, historic seasons regress.
Yeah, so what I'm talking about there, the value is that to me there's some value in Julio Jones later because there's every chance he's going to be the second best receiver. Like I said, if you just assigned me Odell Beckham, I'd be like, oh, fantastic. I'm not a crazy person.
Right.
I just see great value in Julio Jones and some possibility that of course, nobody forgets about Julio Jones, but on a wraparound league, getting him at the end of the second round seems like a solid pick.
I agree that he's the guy you might get at 10 or so, and that is a very good value if you can do that.
There you have it. So that is who is Fantasy's #1 pick, including some sleepers. You can check out Chris Liss over at rotowire.com. Are you bringing back Beating the Book for this season?
Of course.
All right. Make sure to check that out. We'll leave some links in the description below. For bad gambling advice, you can follow at BenMank77 on Twitter. This has been TYT Sports and RotoWire. Do not forget to subscribe and leave all your comments in the comment section below.